Hello everyone. This video is designed to go over some of the basic concepts of sound for the Digital Storytelling and Programming Digital Media course with the LSU Pathways. This is just going to touch on some of the basic concepts that we need to know moving forward. Um, so if you've had some experience in working in sound, whether it be sound design, music courses, anything like that, some of this may be a little bit of review. That being said, there's also a ton more information that we could really dive down into, but it's not really relevant to what we'll be doing in the class. So if anything I go over today seems, potentially interesting and you'd like to learn more, feel free to put a comment down in the video and I'll either just bring it up in class or I'll make another video dedicated directly to that. So, all right. Moving forward, so what is sound? It's kind of the main part of this video, the main theme of the presentation, and essentially at the simplest level, sound is essentially the vibration of molecules. All right. So what I want you to do real quick is take your hand and kind of press it up against your throat, and talk, sing, make some noise. You should hear the organs in your throat vibrating as you're talking. Um, so that's just one example, but essentially anything can generate a sound if it causes the molecules around it to vibrate, if it's transferring energy outward. All right. So essentially, if going back to working, in your voice, your vocal cords, when they get told by your brain how to make noise, they're going to vibrate, and that vibration is going to cause the air molecules around them to then, you know, vibrate and push into other air molecules, and so on and so on. And these vibrations will travel, out of your body through the air until they get perceived by some other person's ears, and then they hear you talking. All right. So this happens very fast. These sounds travel fast. Not the fastest thing out there, but they're pretty fast. Generally speaking, in air, the speed of sound is approximately 331 or so meters per second. This varies a little bit just based on the temperature of the air. However, this is not a constant rate. I mean, the speed of sound in air you can kind of refer to as about that number, but depending on what those vibrations are traveling through, the speed is different. So essentially, the denser the material, the faster the molecules travel, because they don't have to travel as far before one molecule bumps into another molecule and transfers its energy to that one. So, if this is the starting one, it kind of go, bump, travel, bump, 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 bump. And they're traveling less far in denser materials. I kind of have a little graph here showing how, gases, because gases are extremely spread out. They're not very dense at all. Have kind of the lowest speed of sound. And as we get into some liquids, that's bumped up, and the denser the solids are, the faster air or sound travels, especially compared to air. All right. So what does this look like? I've kind of got a little GIF here. And you can see we've got this kind of gray bar here is pushing the air molecules, and they kind of all bunch up and spread apart, and it makes these waves that travel through the medium until they be perceived on the other end. Um, so this causes these cycles of very densely packed molecules and kind of troughs almost of um, not densely packed molecules. You kind of see that here, these um, lines of thick. There's a lot of molecules here, then there's not a lot in between them. Um, all right, and this is important in sound. This is what lets us, perceive sound in a very specific way. All right, so what's important to note is how many times these waves are happening and how big they are. Those are kind of the key things to be aware of. All right. So I mentioned the amount of times that these waves happen when they're generated by a sound. All right, and this kind of helps determine the pitch of it, called the frequency. All right, we measure this in the number of cycles or waves created by the sound per second. The measurement for this is called the hertz. It's the guy who came up with it. And essentially, the higher the frequency, the higher the perceived pitch of the sound. So a note way down here is going to have a much lower frequency in terms of vibrations per second than a note way up here. It's going to be much higher. Essentially, if you've ever played any kind of music, you know that we kind of have this kind of cyclic repetition of pitches that we hear. You know, there's a low C and a high C. Well, every time you repeat those and get another C higher on the keyboard, you've essentially just doubled the frequency of that original pitch. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. Just wanted to bring that up now while I was talking about frequency. It's essentially the number of cycles per second that you are hearing determines the pitch that you hear, right? And the higher the hertz, the higher the frequency. Along with that, the loudness of the sound is determined by the size of the waves or the amplitude of them. If I go back to this diagram, the more this gray bar would be pushing the air molecules, it's essentially transferring more energy to them. The waves are bigger and more powerful, and that's what makes a louder sound. All right, so if I was whispering very quietly, like this, I'll get closer to the microphone. So if I'm whispering very quietly, my vocal cords are not vibrating very loudly. So the sound is very quiet because it doesn't have a lot of energy. But if I was talking rather loudly, my vocal cords will be vibrating much more, transferring more energy to the air and eventually to the microphone or to your ears, causing these sounds to be perceived as louder because there's more energy in the waves. Generally speaking, we can represent the volume of the sound in terms of decibels. So let me talk at a normal volume here. Decibels of air pressure, and that's just abbreviated dB if you ever see that. That's generally speaking one of the more common ways to represent sound volume. There's a few. We don't need to get into the details of that for this class. Just know that the larger the amplitude of the wave, the louder the sound. All right, so let's talk a little bit about biology and how human ears work. So ears, it's a complex organ and collection of other body parts that help humans perceive sound. All right, and there's a few different parts to that. All right, so I'll keep this on the screen for just a second, but I've got a diagram on the next slide, and I'll kind of walk everyone through just how humans hear incoming sounds. All right. So this is a diagram of the human ear. You'll see right here, this is the what most people would refer to as their ear on the outside of their head. This is called the pinna, right? And it works to kind of funnel in incoming sounds. That's why it kind of is like a little radar dish that's picking up the sounds that you're hearing, and it's helping just navigate the vibrations into your ear canal here. As they go, and eventually those vibrations are going to travel, vibrating through here, through the air, until they hit this little green circle in the diagram right here. This is the eardrum, or the tympanic membrane. All right, so these vibrations have been traveling through the air and are now bumping up against this membrane, and that's causing the membrane itself to vibrate. All right, and then connected to that is a series of bones in the middle ear here. And these bones are, again, picking up those vibrations and funneling it them to a very specific little organ here in the inner ear, this snail-looking guy. All right, and this is called the cochlea. All right, and it has a very specific purpose, okay? So It's all kind of wound up like a snail. And if you were to do a little bit of searching online, I'm sure you could find diagrams of it all straightened out. But essentially, inside of this organ is um, a bunch of fluid and little hair-like uh, membranes. And essentially, the vibrations have traveled through the ear to the membrane, through the bones, which connect to your cochlea. The cochlea's fluid kind of helps act like a filter, almost. So, um, the fluid in the hairs down here will pick up the vibrations of a lower frequency, whereas higher frequencies will travel farther down the organ before vibrating and stimulating um, those little hairs. And what those will do is that's all connected to a bunch of nerves. So different sections of the cochlea will vibrate depending on the frequency of the sound you're hearing, and that will stimulate different nerves that then travel to your brain. So talking down here will vibrate some fluid in this part of your ear, and travel down some nerves, whereas hearing very high sounds will stimulate other nerves, so your brain can pick up these and interpret them differently. And again, just with a louder noise, that's going to just cause stronger vibrations to travel through here and essentially cause more stimulation of those nerves. So that's how we hear louder versus softer sounds. All right, so that's essentially just kind of a walkthrough of what ears do. Again, that's a very basic overview of it all. Um, but just know that, yes, your ears may be bendy on the outside, but they have bones in them, and those bones are very important. So, in people who have gone deaf, there may be a variety of causes why. It could be something with the bones or the cochlea or the nerves. But that's why you don't want to shove Q-tips too far in your ears, because you could damage this membrane and your hearing. All right. So let's move on just a little bit. So I mentioned that different areas of the cochlea get stimulated and transmit that into nerves depending on the frequencies. And humans, generally speaking, can hear between 20 and 20,000 hertz. All right, that's a fairly large frequency range. All right, so very very low notes and very high notes. However, this is not a a solid range. All right, this range can vary from person to person. Whether it be based on the sound's timbre, the volume, distance from the ear that the sound started at, the quality of the speakers you're listening to, the age of the listener, the shape of the listener's head. All these things can affect the range of frequencies that a person can hear. So no two people are going to hear the same exact same frequency, generally speaking. That's also not a rule, but generally speaking, it's different for everyone. And this range of 20 to 20,000 hertz is an approximation for the human population. All right, so if someone says the human hearing, they're generally referring to this range right here. All right, for volume, humans can generally hear anywhere from 0 dB, 0 decibels, up to 100. Again, this varies from person to person, but generally speaking, things that are higher than 100 decibels tend to cause discomfort and pain for people hearing that. So if you've ever had a very loud sound suddenly play, it's very uncomfortable in your ears. It was more than likely above 100 decibels. One thing to note is that listening to kind of moderately loud sounds, not above that threshold of pain, but still fairly loud for extended periods of time, can cause the same kind of pain and hearing damage over time as a loud burst of something that was loud. And again, for the same reasons and causes as before, these are all slightly different. Someone's threshold of pain might be slightly higher than another person's. A person might not be able to hear things at super low volumes, whereas someone else might have great hearing down there. It varies from person to person. All right, so what I have here, when I do this little presentation in class, I have a video that plays through an entire, 20 to 20K frequency sine wave. Um, One thing to note is I mentioned, on less than ideal speakers, they may not vibrate as well in the lower or higher frequencies, so you're not going to hear those as well. I'm actually not going to play this in the video here. But you can, again, have this right here. I'll put it on the screen. Anyone watching this can search for this and find it on their own. But again, I'm not going to play it right now, partly because my computer's not set up to capture the computer audio, partly because, again, you can just find it. It's all right there, keeping it on the screen. Just do a quick search. You can check that out, kind of figure out what your hearing frequency is. I would recommend not listening to this through headphones, all right? That's just what I would recommend. All right. Moving forward. Oh, it started playing anyways. There we go. One thing that once you've listened to this, you could possibly pause the video and come back, is that you'll notice that the volume of the sounds seem to fluctuate a little. However, if you were to run that into a program and look at the volume of the sound, you'll notice that it isn't really changing. However, but it sounds like it is. And that's because, and we can really tell that because we can hear that constant sweep of the frequency as it goes. And this is because humans perceive certain frequencies as being louder than others. All right. So if you're ever working with audio, depending on the frequency you're working with, you may have to bump or cut the volume of that in order to get everything to sit right in your mix. But again, on the next slide, I have a little diagram showing that. Without getting into a ton of details, essentially, if you were to play a sound here, at 100 hertz, and you were to play your sound constantly at 60 dB, you can see how that eventually kind of it starts off at a good level and it kind of drops off our perceived sound level here. Kind of drops down a bit as sounds get higher. There's kind of a little dip, and then they start to pick up again in that very high range. Generally speaking, the peaks of these are right around the human speaking range, generally speaking, and then we can hear those kind of higher sounds again when they start to pick up. So that's basically the key thing to take away from this, is that different frequencies have sound louder or softer. All right. So how can we represent all of this stuff? I had that diagram a few slides back of the physical mechanics of making a wave, but that didn't really convey a lot of information, and it was very slow. Waves happen very quickly. Remember, they're traveling 331 meters a second through the air. So this is all happening very quickly. How can we look at that and represent this in ways that we can understand? Well, there's several ways to do it. We're going to look at 3 specific ones in this presentation. I'm sure you'll be able to find more in other things outside of here, but for now, I'm just going to go over kind of the 3 main ones that we go over in for this class, and that you're most likely to see. All right, the first one, we have kind of musical and pitch notation. This is a way to kind of describe a music's frequency, which in music is often called the pitch, in kind of a graphic manner. All right, so we give specific frequencies a note name, and you can refer to those by placing them on certain positions in the music staff. So moving left to right indicates the passage of time, and then the vertical aspect of this is the pitch. So the higher on the graph you are, the higher the pitch, essentially. Now these notes are very specific frequencies. If you want something a little more abstract or something that's not these, musical notation might not be the best way to go about setting this up. But it's a very clear way to kind of determine things. On a keyboard, you have the same kind of thing. You have the note names or on specific keys, and it's laid out in this repeating pattern. So moving from left to right up the keyboard is increasing the pitch. The note names tend to they repeat. Right? You have just looking at the white keys here: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and so on and so on. I mentioned early on there's kind of this cyclical nature to musical notation. So the relationship to that is, if you have here, let's say this is A3, the third A on the keyboard. The fourth A. You have A0, 1, 2, 3, right here. All right, unless that's at a frequency of 220 hertz. So whenever you play that pitch, the sound coming out is vibrating 220 times a second. Well, if you go up to the next A on the keyboard, right here, you've now doubled the frequency compared to that first note. So this is vibrating at 440 times a second whenever you play this note. And to go up one more, you would then be at 880, and so on and so on. So when you're playing higher notes, the distance between them in terms of hertz increases. All right, waveforms. This will be probably one of the most common ways that we're representing sound in this class. This will be a very familiar sight as we go through it. When we record sounds, this will be the way that things get represented by default. You can change that in the program I'm going to talk about later, but that's more work than you need to do unless you specifically need it for a reason, which won't pop up in this class. But generally speaking, the waveform represents the amplitude of the sound. This is very similar to that diagram I had at the beginning. I'm not going to slide back through all my slides, but you can rewind and check that out, of all of the molecules that were close together and far apart. So generally speaking, I'll look at this one down here. When the molecules are close together, you get the high pressure, and it comes up, and when they're farther apart, you get that lower pressure, that lower density of molecules. So it goes down to the bottom, and so on and so on. So what a computer does, and I'll talk about this in more detail in a different video, is essentially look at incoming sounds and says, hey, it's at this level, and takes a snapshot and connects all those together and makes a waveform. And then this is happening very quickly, so you get a large, dense collection of these. So this diagram over here is the same kind of diagram as this blue one here. It's just really zoomed in and stretched out, so you can kind of see the difference in how, if you were to zoom way in on this diagram, it would look more like this one, but we've just condensed several minutes of sound into that range, so it looks like you've probably seen this before. And again, you get the positive and negative values is how it's referred to. Again, positive, and that deals more with electricity. We'll get more into that a little bit later, but we don't need to right now. Just know that the denser the molecules are in that sound wave that's traveling, the wave's going to go up, and it's going to come down when they get less dense with the wave. All right, so we got that there. Let's move on. All right, frequency diagrams. These can be kind of trippy looking, but essentially they represent the frequencies present in a given sound. Sounds generally are made up of a large number of frequencies. I'm not going to get into all of that right here, but if you see a diagram like this, this one's cut out a little bit, but generally speaking, there'll be a little guide on the side that says, how, what the frequencies are, and then as you move from left to right, that's time. All right. So as you go, the height on the graph is the frequency. So seeing things way up high indicates a higher frequency than seeing things down below. The brighter the light indicates the loudness, or there's more of this frequency. So in this particular sound, it's made up more of these frequencies down here in this area, and then little remnants of higher values way up at the in this range. And we may not even be able to hear some of these. But just know that the brighter the sound, the louder the frequency, and then the height is determinant of what that frequency is. That's the quick way to read a spectrogram. All right. So that's pretty much what I'm going over in this video as a whole. What I want to kind of leave with is we'll be able to work with all this stuff and see it in action. In the digital storytelling class, we'll be working in the program Audacity. If you want to go find that and download that, you're more than welcome to. They're on the school computers that we'll be using, but they'll be right here. In the programming digital media, we won't be working with it in this context in Audacity, but you're more than welcome to check it out here if you want. I'll talk more about that program in a dedicated presentation. I just wanted to say that, hey, this is what we're going to be using, so check it out if you haven't already, just to kind of familiarize yourself with the look of it. All right, so that's the end of it for right now. I have more to talk about. I'm going to go over different kinds of microphones, how they work, the details of digital sound recording and playback. And then again, we'll be doing all this stuff in Audacity. We'll be recording sounds, playing things back, doing all of that. But before I get into that, I just want to take a break and kind of review everything we've done so far. All right. So again, just the real short of it, vibrations through some kind of physical medium. When those stimulate the organs in your ears, that's how humans hear a sound. All right, humans hear a wide range, about 20 to 20,000 hertz, generally speaking, and from 0 dB of volume up. But after a certain point, that gets painful to hear. So be careful; you don't want to have your sounds too loud. There's different ways of looking at sounds. You can use musical notation, writing musics that tell the instrumental performers or the vocalist what frequencies to generate and what time. The waveform, you can see the details of the wave, of the amplitudes for that sound. Spectrograms show off the frequencies that are present in a sound in detail. So again, that's just kind of the core of that. For the people taking my class, at this point I'll give you all just like a little review quiz to make sure you understand everything. If there's anything we need to go over as a group, that's when I'll do that after I check those out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask either in class, put a comment on the video, and I'll either respond right to that, or I'll just make another video about the topic if it's a question that I need to get more into. All right, that's everything for this presentation. If you have, like I said, any questions, let me know. And everyone, I'll see you all the next time that I see you. Have a great day.